Meeting of the Community Preservation Committee on January 10th will come to order. The first thing I'd like to discuss, and it is slightly out of order, is we have the good fortune to have Town Council here tonight to talk with us about the Acton court case and the impact on religious institutions. And our friends from St. Paul's are also here because they have an interest in this as well. So we thought we'd do the two together because that's the logical thing to do. So, Suzanne, the floor is all yours.
Good evening. So you've asked me to come tonight to sort of discuss the recent Supreme Judicial Court case, the Kaplan versus the Town of Acton. And that case involved the Town of Acton granting funds through their CPC to a church building. And they granted it for two particular purposes. One is restoration of the historic building, or the church building itself, and the other one was for funding of a plan to look at sort of a master plan for their complex. A group of taxpayers challenged that funding, and that was initially went to the Superior Court, and the court at the trial level said, yes, it's fine and it's an okay to fund religious organizations because the CPA itself has a public purpose. And then when it was appealed to the Supreme Judicial Court, the taxpayers stated that their position was that the funding was against the anti-aid amendment. Now, the anti-aid amendment says particularly that public funds cannot be used for a private purpose. Public funds can be used for a private entity as long as they serve a public purpose, but they can't just go for that private purpose. And so the court had to look at whether or not this type of funding for a religious organization met that test. And they laid out a certain test that to look at and when churches are funded. And I can go into the details of that if you want me to, or I don't know how deep you want me to go. But essentially what the court said is that you look at whether or not the purpose of the funding was just for the religious organization, like to further a religious purpose. And then if it is, then that violates the anti-aid amendment. But and so then if it does not, then you get to the second part of the test, and that is whether it has the effect of bringing about that religious purpose. So first of all, it's like, is it the intent? So you're saying here, I'm just going to give you examples, right? I'm going to give you the $10 for you to go put on a service. So that obviously is a violation. And then the next one is does it have the effect of it? I'm not going to give it to you I'm not going to give you the $10 to put on the service, but if I give you this $10, you're going to use it to put on a service. Then that's the effect. And then the third test is a little bit more complicated, or actually a lot more complicated, because then it becomes a three-part test again. And that is whether there was like this hidden intent. Like we say this is to preserve a building, but really the hidden intent of the government is to fund that religious group. And that's something that somebody who's challenging the funding has to prove. It's not something that, we're not going to assume, nobody's going to assume that there's a hidden purpose, but that is something that they would challenge. And then the second test is whether the government becomes entangled in religious establishments. So does the funding create a relationship between the government and the church or the religion so that there's an entanglement, and then taxpayers would feel like their money is being used to support a religion that they don't either support or that they just don't want to support religion. And then the last sort of test, which is even more gray, is whether or not the funding defeats the purposes of the anti-aid amendment. So whether it's going to, the anti-aid amendment was enacted because of the civic controversy that is caused by funding of religious organizations. There's discourse and disagreements between people, and so what they look at is whether this will have that effect. So if you have a religious organization comes to you and says, can you give us your $10, and then you have another couple of organizations that come and they also are asking for the $10 funding, are you making a choice between the religious organization and other non-religious organizations, and is that going to cause this sort of civil discord amongst the community members because you're making a choice? and you're choosing to aid the religious organizations.
But it's just anyway, independent of religious organization anyway. You're still choosing between organizations, we're saying it violates the anti-aid amendment, is that right?
Right, because, well, that's one of the things that the court considers. And it becomes a balancing test, so they say that the entire, like, analysis is a balancing test.
Okay.
If you look at, if everything is, you're going down the path, and then it gets to the point where there's, you're funding this religious organization, and it's causing this, discord and arguments that it is funding a religious organization as opposed to other public purposes, then the courts will look at that and they say, is that a violation of the anti-aid?
If one of them is a religious organization,
Right.
that makes the difference, right? If it's just two people, two organizations that are having a civil, argument about them, that's okay, because you're both fit the purpose of our thing. But if
Got it.
one of them is religious, then that's what tips the scale.
Right, and it's also because of the anti-aid, it has to be a public purpose. So if it's a non-religious and one is more private benefit
Right.
than a public one,
Then it-
then that's the same
That's the
notion of the
okay, got it. So
anti-aid.
the anti-aid isn't specifically for religious organizations, it's private organizations.
Oh, it's
Got
all
it.
public funding for private
Got it.
purposes.
Right, but
So you
I
have-
just want to make the point that just because there's civil discord doesn't go past the threshold. It has to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and I would absolutely agree with that, yes.
Struck me as odd.
So that, so that's sort of, I just sort of laid it all out. And I think that one of the things that's, because this is still new, that what happened is the court remanded it back to the town of Acton to look at all those issues and to review the application in light of its analysis, but then the case was settled. I believe the church withdrew its application. And so then there was never this ability to sort of then relook at it and say,
Right.
okay, now you've done this analysis and now the facts are before us and now we can make a determination as to whether or not that funding is appropriate. So we don't have that sort of next step that would make it really easy for everybody.
So there's no case law now, is what you're
Wasn't
saying?
it in the report, wasn't there a lawsuit after
No,
after the work was done? No?
not that it went all the way through.
And not that I know of, that Newburyport was providing funding to a church and then it was appealed.
Yeah.
So it didn't go to the Supreme Judicial Court, so it might have gone into a trial court, but I'm not familiar with that case.
Does the decision still have precedential value, even though it didn't
Oh,
end up?
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
absolutely. So, and that's why it's all in sort of a gray area, because
Right.
it laid out the test. So everybody, now that if you have an application from a church or a religious organization, you have to apply this test and you have to make sure. And I would suggest that you just review it with all this in mind. So, and you're very sort of blatant in the record that you're establishing, that you say, we understand that we have to do this, we understand that this is sort of a cloudy area right now, and so we want to make sure that we're going to go through this entire test and get the documents before you, make sure that the reason for funding is given. So it's with a historic church building, you have that exchange for the historic preservation agreement, but you want to ensure that it's not a historic church building, like the significance isn't because of the religious activity that occurred for that particular religion, but it's more of a historic significance to the entire community.
Like I said, I have a question on that, I guess on number 2 of the tests, where it has the effect of supporting a religious organization. I mean, maybe this is a bit of a hypothetical, but let's suppose it's a historic building, everyone agrees it's a historic building that maybe is in some sort of disrepair or somewhere it needs some preservation, without which it won't be able to continue as a religious organization. We fund it, it gets preserved in a historic sense, but that also allows the religious organization to continue. Does that, I know you probably can't
Right.
answer,
So-
is that the kind of gray area that we're in, or?
That's that issue. So one of the things that I looked at before, coming here tonight is there were 2 different memos written by 2 different sort of essays on the case itself and the case, and they do deal with that issue, exactly what you're
Okay.
raising, is that one of the things I said, if it's a large sum of money, which allows the church to put the large sum of money into the historic renovation of their church, and therefore they can use that large sum for their religious programming, then you look at that,
Okay.
right? But if it's, you know, if it's a smaller amount of money, that you're not actually supplanting.
Propping up the organization.
Right.
So it's, yeah, I mean, the argument is, it's a fungibility argument, right? The money's fungible, so that even if you're not doing it for the private purpose, if it allows the other
Right.
money to go for that purpose. I'm wondering, because there's a long history of, you know, the anti, I mean, you know, some people think it's the know-nothing things that the reason it came in, but, you know, originally that was used to avoid funding for like parochial schools. And, you know, obviously there is some funding for parochial schools, books, buses, and other things. I'm wondering, like, how do you justify it? Because it seems under one thing, you look at all these criteria, and you could say nothing would ever pass, because there always is a religious nexus here. So how do they justify it in those other cases, which in my mind are relevant to this one?
So one of the cases that the Supreme Court looked at prior to this was funding private schools that provided special education, and there was a challenge to that, saying that, no, this is actually to prop up the school, or to use so that the school could function, and not for a public purpose. And then in that instance, the court looks at the purpose of providing the education to the students that they wouldn't otherwise have. Because there's an obligation to educate the children, and it's just a change in the focus of it. Yes. So it's really what you're looking at, how the funds are used.
So one of the things I know when we talked about this briefly was that you suggested that any applicant who comes forward with a project that fits under this should be cognizant of the tests and explain in detail how they overcome them.
Exactly. So that's what I would definitely suggest, is that you have a set of criteria, and you have the documentation submitted to you, like how are the funds going to be used? Are those funds going to be sort of sequestered? This is only for this particular purpose. You know, the amount of the funding, is it a significant amount that allows them to put this other significant amount into the religious programming, or is this just you know, a proportion of the amount needed for the preservation of the church? The other thing that the courts have looked at is whether or not it's a church that is also used for other secular reasons. Is it just
Can you talk about that some more? That's important, I think, here. Yeah.
So in the sort of analysis, the gray area analysis, where we look at whether there's an entanglement and whether there's the anti-aid, you know, the civic discord, you would also look at whether or not this is a church that's only, a building that's only significant for the religious purposes, and it's solely used for those religious purposes. Then you're going to have, then it's going to be grayer, right, to say that this is a public benefit. Because you're always looking at whether this is a public benefit, whether you're taking taxpayer dollars, because that's what they are, and those taxpayers are then funding a religious organization. Because that's the part where that's what anti-aid says, that you can't use taxpayers' dollars to fund a religious organization. It has to be a public purpose. So,
On that line, so if it was a church, two questions actually. If it was a church that had historical significance, thank you. It's been a long day. Historical significance, you know, if it was on the registry or something along those lines, needed a new steeple, what have you. You know, I wonder, is that something that we could look at almost in a different light than this, because it is within our mission, the historical preservation aspect of it. And then in addition to that, if it was a church that has meeting space or rooms that is used very regularly in a secular way.
So your second part is correct, right?
Okay.
If it is a church, if it's a historic church in a historic district, it's used in a secular way, there's community meetings, there's, you know, a lot of churches
Girl
have
Scouts.
Girl
whatever.
Scouts,
Plays,
daycare,
yeah.
plays, all, you know, food banks. They have all sorts of activities going
Okay.
on in that church building. Then yes, that's something that you would consider, right?
Right.
Is this benefiting, is this providing this preservation for this historic building that is used by the community. So is that serving a public purpose? That weighs on the side more of a
Okay.
public purpose. Now, with regard to the historic preservation aspect of it, the town of Acton case came up through a historic church, and they were exchanging the funds for the historic preservation. So that doesn't make that, that's not a big distinguishing factor.
Okay.
That says, we don't have to go through our analysis. You
Okay.
still have to
You
go
still
through
have
your
to go through the
analysis.
analysis,
The exchange of the preservation agreement is the public purpose, but then you go one step down because it has that religious aspect to it.
Okay, thank you.
Right, so just to expand upon that a little, so if the church were to meet all of the criteria that Tracy so eloquently put out there, but they're asking for historical preservation funding for their steeple, which is on top of their chapel, which only has religious services, but the part, but there's a lecture hall or something off to the side that has, school plays or community plays or Girl Scouts or whatever. That, I assume that would be a no, would recommend a
Right.
no on that because
Right.
it doesn't directly impact the part of the religious facility that services the public good or the community.
What if the steeple was
It
gonna
could-
fall on the
well,
public?
But beyond it, is the aesthetics and.
I guess that's really what I'm
The
getting at.
preservation of a
Yeah.
historic building that's in view of the public, does that not serve a public purpose, I guess, is part of my,
Well, it does serve a public.
regardless of use, I guess I would say.
Well, it does serve a public purpose. I
Okay.
mean, that's what it's been determined
Okay.
under the Community Preservation Act,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
That's a historic building, you can do that
So regardless of what goes
exchange.
on underneath that particular building.
Which goes for what it's used for.
Yeah.
So if it's in that situation and on top of the church is the big religious symbol, right?
Giant
And
cross, yeah.
a giant
not-
cross or a giant, anything.
Yeah, yeah.
In that instance, if the CPA funds were used for that, then you would definitely lean on the side of that's religious,
Right.
supportive really for a religious benefit.
But most of these churches and these are kind of complexes, they're all connected, and one wouldn't be there without the other, type thing. So how do you view that, because now, you can't, where do you stop the church to whatever, because it's all connected. Yeah, in most
Right.
most halls are connected to the churches and that type of thing, so.
Right, so that becomes really challenging, I think. I believe that the court decision makes that a very challenging for the use of public funds.
Yeah.
So if I recall, there was some mention, I read, skimmed, a little bit about, and they made a comment about the stained glass in the church. And
Right.
so how can that help kind of illustrate?
So that would be the
Decision.
same as the cross on top of the steeple.
So you could do, let's say the window frames were falling out, right? But they held the stained glass. Could you do the window frames?
So if you always think about it in terms of, so the reason why this would be, I always look at it as, how will this be challenged? How would that act be challenged? So the act would be challenged by a taxpayer saying, you're using my tax dollars to fund a religious organization or a religion that I don't want my tax dollars used for.
Right.
And so if those funds are used for the frames around the stained glass, which portrays a religious, activity,
right.
then that taxpayer is going to say, my funds are being used for them.
The elbow.
And I think if you look at it from the
Right.
perspective of the taxpayer
Right.
money, what is this? This is taxpayer money. That's sort of the basis for their ability to have a lawsuit in the first
Right.
place, because they're challenging that. And then you say, what can taxpayer dollars be used for? Only for public purposes.
Right.
And it's a public purpose is to benefit all of the public.
Can I ask a question on the challenging of it? Is it only challengeable by North Andover taxpayers, or is there anyone in Massachusetts who can challenge? If this body made a decision, would it only be challenged by North Andover residents, or could someone in Acton who's still spurned decide that they want to continue the case?
That's a good question.
So typically, in order for it's a 10 taxpayer lawsuit, and they have to show that it's they're being harmed by their taxpayer dollars being
have to
used
be
in
in
this
a-
manner.
They have to have standing, right?
They have to have
don't.
standing,
Yeah.
and that's their
Yeah.
standing. is
But
that
there
they're
is state
harmed.
money involved.
There's
so
match,
that-
there's a state match.
Right, there is a match, so if they can show, this is my, still my tax dollars involved. they could
Oh,
potentially do
so,
it.
yeah, you could get. So what I'm garnering from this conversation is that anytime a religious organization or a religious building or what have you comes before this body, we're gonna kick it back to you, basically.
Well, I think you provide us the test, right?
Right, right, and so I would suggest that if anytime that happens, and you ask for the documentation. So it's much better to ask the applicant to provide you all the information that you need to make this decision before you start making the decision.
Right.
Right, and then the other thing that I just remembered to
Yeah.
I think I already mentioned this, is the fact that they have to show that those funds will be set aside only for that purpose. That's a really important part.
Which is only fair.
Yeah.
Right, and I mean, that's typical.
Yeah, and
Right,
in our case, it's fairly simple because we're reimbursing
right.
usually
That's-
expenses, like somebody paid for
That's-
the architect or this part of the project, we would see the exact receipt and John would inspect it before it was reimbursed.
Right, that is true.
I wonder if any of you from St. Paul's have any specific questions based on this discussion that you would like to ask now. Feel free to.
Maybe she'd like to listen to what we propose and apply it. You hear parts of it as I listen to it that are pretty straightforward as it applies to our case. The test of how much, the test of historic, the test of other things that it's used for. But there's so many gray areas laying off to the side, it takes somebody who's pretty skillful to say, yeah, all that makes sense, but, so I just wonder if she'd like to listen to what we propose.
I would be happy to listen to it, but I wouldn't want to engage in that analysis tonight, because it really is a balancing test, and it's not me who engages in that balancing test. But it's-
Well, what I would suggest, and then maybe people will have other suggestions, is to give kind of a broad general overview tonight of what you're proposing versus, in the distinctions versus last time. And we'll not try to go into the probing questions tonight, but we will during the proceeding. Yes.
So I've only got a few, I didn't think a lot. This is question that.
No, I don't see.
Oh, okay. I'll listen to it.
Isn't that awesome?
This is part of what we gave
She's all right.
last year. She's going to be down in
Well, as it turns out, she's an attorney, yeah.
I'm trying to think of a list of some of the end of his They do come with. My mother goes, Les Lawrence. That's right, thank you. This is the old one.
So,
Is this the new proposal?
well, it's a variation on what we did last year. And so the colors, the colored pieces are from the proposal before. The red shows what has been done on the building already,
On your own.
right?
Right.
And the blue shows what we hope can be done. So this is St. Paul's Episcopal Church. It's located at 390 Main Street in North Andover. According to the Massachusetts Historical Commission's MACRIS database, St. Paul's Episcopal Church is a historically and architecturally significant property comprised of the church, which was built in 1881, the French Memorial Building, which was built in 1893, Parish Hall, which was built in 1915, and then the rectory, which was built in 1919. The property has a significant history as part of the Mill District in town, and it's also located across from the Stevens Memorial Library, which is an area designated on the National Historic Register of Historic Places. And I've got an Exhibit A that I've attached there that just shows you the MACRIS database printout. So currently, the property is used for community or secular use in the following ways. It's the associated buildings of the church campus, which includes the French Memorial Building, the Parish Hall, and the rectory. They're used for AA meetings, community preschool, community yoga classes. There are 3 Girl Scout troops that meet at the facility. An East Indian dance troupe utilizes the facility, and the church has applied for and it has received a grant to offer an after-school program for North Andover Middle School students who are right down the way. The building is open for people to rent at a reasonable cost for bridal showers, baby showers, and the like. The rector, Sarah Mateo, who's right here, at the vestry, and St. Paul's parishioners all welcome the use of the buildings by the community and would be willing to partner with the town to provide a venue for events. In terms of the religious use, there is you'll see on the schematic that we've given you, there's the church building. It's used for church services, weddings, funerals, church business, and the like. So our proposal to the Community Preservation Fund would be for exterior restoration work for the French Memorial, the parish building, the rectory, and the church. And all of this is part of the main historical campus. And I've got an Exhibit B that I've attached to that, which shows the costs. Last year, St. Paul's Property Committee estimated the work for each of the areas that we've discussed, the church, the French Memorial, the parish hall building, and the rectory. This is all the exterior work, would be about $175,000. And so to account for rising costs, we've added 4% to the figure, which brings the estimated cost to about $182,000. So the French Memorial and the parish hall are utilized by the community more than members of the actual parish, as noted above. And the rectory, which is a significant landmark on Main Street, is the home of the rector, who provides immediate supervision for the property, and she also helps the members of the public to gain access to the buildings on the campus as required. So I don't know what questions you have, but I brought the people who understand about building more than me. So Tom and Peter. So if you have any questions.
I don't know, are we diving into this?
Yeah, let's not go super deep, but let's, I think, just to get a level so we understand, how deep, so shoot ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just curious.
This is basically the same project from last year, right?
Seems
It is essentially the same project. We just wanted to highlight this time around that the buildings in particular that we're interested in funding are the ones that are, they're for the community and also that they're historically very visible. You'll see on the schematics where it's blue that there's only a very small portion that's left that actually needs, that's part of the church that needs to be attended to. I do understand that the buildings are attached. However, the areas are distinct, and the French Memorial and the Parish Hall are used more by the public, honestly. I do believe that's a correct statement. Than they are actually, by the parishioners. So if you percent it, you added it up by percentage, you'd see that it was, and the rectory itself is historically significant and faces Main Street, and everybody sees it when they drive by.
Yeah, it's true.
Just to add to it, to catch that as a number, I like the idea that the question about the steeple, the amount of funds that we're asking for that go to the chapel, the church part, is less than 1%. The money is elsewhere, so just trying to catch what were the tests sort of things. We think that most of the money, we know that most of the money is going elsewhere. And what the most of the money is buying shingles and woodwork, because that's the stuff that's rotten away, and that's what creates the bad appearance. And paint, that's what we're looking for. And of course, the windows are a part of that, and Sarah mentioned, we expect energy efficiency out of that, which is I suppose an advantage, but I think something that everybody would be looking for. The windows that we're doing, except for a little bit of windows up in the parish hall, are the windows in the rectory, because we look at it and the way we proposed it last year, exactly the same. It's one campus, it's one setup. The buildings were built over a period of time, but it's all one big happy family. And if one part looks bad, the other part looks bad as well. And the other thing I'd say to you is, remember, although we don't bring it out now, it's a continuation of what we were trying to do. 6 years ago, we embarked on a program to restore our building. We went out and we had a fund drive within the church, and we were assisted in that by the diocese. It was a combined program, and we raised a total of a couple $100,000, and we went out and we put that into our church. And we were smart, as it turns out, I suppose, because we started at the front corner of the church and we worked in either direction. And the reason we did that was that's the part that looked the worst, and that's the part we wanted to look the best. And so consequently, consequently, we've done the church part. It's the other parts now that are lagging behind in terms of the needs of funds. And again, it's we raised, and I think in that program, in terms of what we put into the actual reconstruction, $150,000 or thereabouts, about half of what we're talking about here today. But of course, we have a budget which is much larger than that in terms of the total budget. So it's not like we're asking for a huge sum of money that's going to make a tremendous difference to us. I mean, it's very important because we can't do it otherwise. We've drained the well. You can only go back, you all know, you can only go back to the congregation so many times, and and then it's kind of like, well, either wait or put it off, or and so that's what our option is at that point, and that's why, quite frankly, we turn to you. We kind of like to have the place look pretty good and be there for the next generation. Just some filler.
That leads me to a question then. Could we cherry pick, for instance, where, granted, it's all connected in a campus?
So this is what I would say. There's a test that's required for any funding of a religious organization. And regardless of where that money is used necessarily, you still have to look at that.
Okay, that's what I thought.
But I mean, to Tracy's point, because I know exactly where you're going, is if you look at the parish hall, and if the parish hall is predominantly a secular purpose, it's a little bit easier to say it passed the test.
I think the test is very broad and sort of very complex. And that's one of the things that we have to consider is the complexity of it and the sort of multi-layered aspect of your analysis. So I think it's difficult to say, oh, X amount of dollars for this particular aspect of the building, whereas really what you're doing, you have to look at, we're funding a religious organization, and the test is the anti-aid with regard to funding religious organizations.
So and then you could even get into, if we fund the hall, and they rent the hall to make money for the church,
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
or, if you fund the hall, the overall, that's money they don't have to spend
That's right.
somewhere else. So it gets crazy the way it's set up.
But to your last point, that's always going to be the case.
Yeah.
It's a zero-sum.
Yeah,
A dollar-
that's what-
Any dollar that is contributed is a dollar they don't have to spend somewhere else. So by that logic, I don't know how it ever passes.
Well, yeah,
What concerns
yeah, that is by process, you're right, by process reduction, you can never, that's why they asked the question about Catholic schools, because you can make the same argument there, but there's been some exceptions to it. So I do think that, I think it's worth having a further discussion on the parish hall and it being a separate purpose.
Is the rectory used for any public purposes at all? I assume not. I mean,
Well, it is a historic, it in and of itself is actually a historic building.
right. And that's the
in
one
town.
Is that the part of the structure that's closest to Main Street?
It's used for living. It's used for
Is that the
living.
part of the building that the structure is closest to Main Street?
Yes, that's correct.
All the way to the right, but how are we, and I'm not trying to be a jerk here, I want just a teensy bit more clarity. How are we determining that the rectory itself is a historic building? Just
Well,
by-
it's actually included in the Macris report. So the Massachusetts Historical Commission included that as part of its determination and has said that they consider it to be a historic building as part of the campus.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't realize it.
Yeah, that's where.
It's included.
The whole campus?
The whole campus is included as a historic.
And
So,
the
so
rectory
it's,
is the newest of the buildings.
That's
It's
correct.
At 100 years old.
and the windows are 100 years old. Single pane.
I would say someone mentioned energy efficiency. I don't know that that necessarily helps with for our purposes of,
Well, the comment that I made in the larger report that I submitted last year was that we would like to have the windows be energy efficient, but historically sympathetic. So they would be put in to mimic what is there, but to save energy.
But saving energy saves money, which goes back into the coffers of the church, which brings us back to the original.
it's
Come on.
I have a question. Just for communities that have spaces that use for Girl Scouts and AA, and if there aren't religious buildings for them to have these, where do they go?
schools.
I don't know. This is, I don't think, it's not
I
us.
mean,
Yeah.
I guess that's the other piece to it, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
Because
I mean,
it's
unfortunately, we don't get,
affordable.
Public
we can't
schools.
answer that, yeah.
That's not us.
Yeah, we're not on the Supreme Judicial Court, right?
Some folks in Acton brought this up. And it's now become,
Well, and one thing that we should point out is that none of the money would be used exclusively for preservation of a historic structure that has been recognized by the town of North Andover itself as being part of the Mill District. And it's right across the street from an area that's been recognized by the United States government as part of the National Register of Historic Places. So there's nothing that's going to be done in terms of windows or in terms of iconography or anything like that. It's really just going to be for exterior preservation so the community continues to have a space to use at an affordable rate.
I mean, the suggestion that I would make is that when you finish your application, first of all, try to segment the cost into the components. I think that will be helpful because you have to build it up that way anyway. But the other thing is that try to answer all these specific questions and elements of the test in your application, and then you can use that for the discussion with us. If you need anything from Suzanne or from us in terms of what that is, we can give it to you.
Okay, that's helpful. Very helpful. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all.
All right.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Suzanne, should we talk about cell towers now?
Oh, sure we do. We're all still citizens.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Can you stay for a minute?
sorry.
Paying overtime.
We may have a town council question.
Oh, okay.
I'll sit back here and take your
Oh, but she had to-
Okay, good, yeah.
Do you want us to keep these, or do you want to hold on to these till you come back? Because we may not have them when you come back, and I'd hate to see you do all that work twice.
Yeah, that's a good call.
These were just, well, actually, it will help you.
You know what, actually, you know what would be terrific is if you could scan those
I was just gonna
and
ask
get
that.
them to, electronic copies. No, these are mine. These are the committee stuff. But I think that would be hugely beneficial if we could have them on an electronic version. Oh, we
Vote on us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good. I do too.
Yeah, hands are tied. The way it's written.
I-
You know, when we went through this with the athletic fields about the turf, it became very simple. You just can't do turf.
Do it.
Period. So it's clear. You know, this is not clear. No.
No.
Because it's, legislation versus a judicial decision. Right. You know, legislation,
A little muddy.
it's going to be a little bit more outlined.
What's next, Chairman?
Good, so do you want to talk about parking?
Okay.
Yeah.
So Deb and I and Terry too had a lot of information. Jen from Conservation, God love her, got a ton of information. I know that the two applications, the Usler and the Academy Road ones, but nobody can find the Rolling Ridge. But it's irrelevant because we have, it's very clear in the conservation paperwork. So,
It should be in the CR.
yeah, we can't find it. Nobody can
Okay.
find it.
Well, I'll go back and look, and I'll call.
On the,
Nellie
I mean, it's all right if we
on that.
can't
Yeah,
find the
okay.
application, because it's not, it's, that one's a little more cut and dry.
But it certainly wouldn't hurt.
Oh, absolutely, I'd love to have it if we could, yeah,
Yeah.
it definitely wouldn't hurt. Anyone in particular want me to start with?
No,
All
whatever
right.
you want.
Well, why don't we do whatever sheet we're gonna need her
Yeah.
on?
Oh, okay, good point, yes, we can get you out of here. Sorry. So, there is one, yeah, we do love having you. So, the one question, Terry and I have,
And if you can't, that's okay.
and then, and Deb was on those emails too, so, sorry for my notes. So, the one question, we're gonna start with the Academy Road ones. So, under that one, there, it was put forth by Center Realty Trust, by the trustees over there. And they had put, it's actually a, the lot was providing parking was a big part of their not a big part, but a part of the application. That they had explained in the application that the parking was damaging the road shoulders, blocking scenic vistas, what have you, and it was having, road parking was having a very large, oh, thank you, Terry, having a negative impact on the area. So in their application to community preservation, one of the things that they said that they would do was to build a gravel lot on, I think, what is it, Lot 3? Lot 3? So on Lot 3. It would be limited parking, but it was basically to stop the negative impact of the parking there. And, however, the lot was to be constructed under Center Realty Trust's own dime. They were to construct it under their own dime. They have not done that. There is no indication that they are going to do that. So the question arises, while it's not community preservation money, we're not looking for that, it was part of the original application. So what's the recourse? And I'm curious if there even is recourse, only because today it's a parking lot, we promised to build a parking lot. Tomorrow, we promise to do something else and don't follow through. So,
Well, I think it impacts the rest of the applications that come before the committee.
Exactly,
It's
that's
how
where
can
the
we
bigger
put
question
teeth
comes.
in these things.
right, where is, we need to have, right, teeth.
I mean, yeah, okay, but I mean, I think you're exactly right, but I mean, I can go talk to Ben Osgood, he's one of the
Well,
trustees.
yeah, we'd love that too.
There's no reason why.
Oh, I don't want to get all testy with anybody yet. I
No.
just, no,
Yeah,
I mean,
I-
yeah, no, I'd
But
much rather have the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, because it'd be one thing for them, benignly not to do it, but it's another thing for them to say, too bad we're not going to do it.
Right, it feels like they've said that.
Yeah,
Well,
I'll talk.
But we've not
yeah.
spoken with them either.
Yeah, I would be surprised if they would do that. I think they would. I mean, because they know they have an obligation to do so.
Well,
They got money for it,
but
so.
I
Right.
don't know, from my reading of things, I don't know if they have an obligation. The
Okay.
documents clearly say, if
Right.
constructed, potential future parking, and I couldn't find any minutes from the actual meeting when this committee
Yeah.
debated, so I don't know if someone said, you're gonna build a parking lot, yes, we'll build
Well,
a parking lot.
yeah, it'd have to be in the conservation restriction.
In the restriction,
Yeah, we'd
that it
have to
would be
look
there.
and say.
I mean, I think-
And there was, Suzanne, that was before your time, wasn't it?
Yeah,
So what
It's
are the ways that you
2014.
deal with issues like this in the future?
Yeah.
Like, so it all depends really on what your documents say, right? That's what it is, your funding proposal,
Yep.
I would assume you're enter into a funding contract,
Mhm.
like you have to have deliverables. So if somebody comes before you and submits something and says, we're gonna put in a parking lot on their own dime, then you just make that as a part of the deliverables, and you tie it. We'll give you your, $10,000 to preserve this,
That's for the rest.
right?
mm-hmm,
But first, you put it in the parking lot, or you put it in the parking lot at the same time, it's dollar for dollar match, it's like a sort of a match. And then you have that ability to enforce.
so it would be that contract going forward.
Yeah, so there should be an typically what people do is there's an application, and there's a contract, and that contract sets it out really specifically. Where your money comes and what they have to do. And
Okay.
then you can stop funding, or at the end, I mean, that's.
Yeah,
Well, I think the main funding went to conserve the open space
the
up
open
there.
space on Academy Road. But I guess the question would be, I just have to look, do you have a legal document? that you
No.
have? Yeah,
Is that
because,
not what this is?
No, which one is that?
This is the reserve rights and,
I think that one's, is that for here, though?
or is this their application?
Yeah, I think we do.
Can I just ask a
We do.
clarifying question, if you don't mind?
yeah, sure, go ahead.
Tracy, so I think before we sort of get into the nitty-gritty of all the documentation, which we can do, and we can have council look at and all that
Right,
stuff,
about
are you looking for a sense of the board as to whether we should go have a conversation with them?
Oh, I absolutely would
Okay,
like this.
so I wholeheartedly agree. So can we, I mean, what, do we
Yeah.
make
Yeah, I
a
mean,
motion? Do we need
what
to-
I suggest, if you don't mind, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. You know, I know Ben Osgood and Charlie Salisbury pretty well in Don Elliott. I know all three of them.
Yeah.
So I'll just go and ask them what's up.
And Brian's right, within the
Totally.
paperwork.
Totally. I think that's absolutely the way to go. I just wanted to get down to what.
Yeah, that's what I was,
Tracy
and
wants.
Brian's absolutely right. In the documents, the follow-up documents, the grantor reserves the right to, no, I'm sorry, that's Ursula, never mind.
No, that's, you're in the right
It's
one.
lot 3, I
Grantor
am?
reserves- Yeah, grantor is, it's the same lot.
Oh, yeah,
It's
okay.
two lot
Oh, yeah,
threes.
that's right.
Grantor reserves the right to construct it.
Right,
Its
proposed,
potential.
my
It's
thing
their sole cost.
is at their sole cost, right. My thing has always been, or the sticking point for me is, we present these at town meeting, we sell them on the parking. You know, this was sold that we were going to get a lot. Granted, I don't think, I was on the board then too, and I was under the impression it was a guaranteed parking lot, those types of
There was no mention of parking in the
things.
town meeting minutes when I looked through them.
But in the actual application, right. So, yeah, I'm with John, just go
I
chat,
totally agree.
just go chat.
Yeah, and I think lesson learned for us in the future, right?
Right. And if it doesn't get built because they say, no, we don't want to, fine. I mean, but we learn and we,
Yeah.
If that speaks to anything, it's
Yeah.
about locking up and getting any
Yeah.
ambiguity.
But
Yeah.
do you see need to have
What's that?
Do you see a need to have anybody come to the meeting?
Ooh, we could. Let me talk to them
Yeah,
and
let-
find out.
Yeah, we don't wanna-
I mean, I don't want to have hostile witnesses.
Yeah,
in,
that's,
but- But, you know, I would be surprised if they objected to it. I mean, they may have an, oh dear, we don't have that much money right now, kind of thing. but-
well, I mean, there
yeah, but
is,
that's-
you know,
But it is
everybody
pretty
up
short
there
money,
is talking
but-
about the need for a parking lot
Yeah,
instead
no,
of
you're
housing,
right.
so the
You're right,
timing might be
and
right.
Yeah,
Or not.
Or not, yeah.
yeah. Well, we'll see. I'll ask.
I didn't see that in here.
I don't know. It went,
Do we know how much the funding was for
I
this one?
forget.
I didn't-
It was a fair amount.
It was-
I think
it was a chunk and a half,
It
yeah.
was a chunk. Gosh, I was doing something, we got a question from TPL this afternoon.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's here. It's
And I pulled this out.
Yeah,
It's-
but I
It's a
was-
lot.
It's $800,000,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
but for the land that was preserved, it's well worth.
Yeah.
Money well spent.
Yeah,
So, John, you'll talk to him?
yeah, I'll talk to Ben.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And then, all right,
And
great.
then, are there conditions in the conservation restriction? Like, so I can imagine, like, I mean, this is the way I envision this going, right? Like, I have a piece of land, I put a conservation restriction on it, therefore I changes the use of the land, and I also reduce the taxes that I pay on the land at the same time, right? So, because I can't develop it, so it's not taxed at the rate the developable land is, but I also give up the right to use it, to develop it in any sort of way. And, you know, is that irrevocable? Or could somebody come back and say, oh, you know what, I decided I want to develop that?
COR is like at least 99 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you have a conservation restriction on your land, you're conveying out that interest. So it's like when you own land, it's a bundle of rights to do anything you want. And then when you say, I'm going to put a conservation restriction, you're giving up, you're conveying out the right to build on it.
Yeah.
So you only own a certain amount of, certain rights to it. You don't own the right to build on it anymore.
At that point, the
So you
town then
can't
owns that right.
change,
Yeah.
right, you can't change your mind. The only way you could get it back presumably is to buy it back.
Buy it back.
Because
Yeah,
especially
and
if-
even then, you got to go back to the state.
if
the town
the
chose to
legislature-
sell.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, how does it differ from, like, in terms of like the use applications, how does a conservation restriction differ from like what's the Agricultural Act like 61A? Because I'm imagining like,
Oh, that's completely different.
Yeah, it's totally.
So-
Well,
It's
you
a
got-
tax
yeah,
classification.
61A just becomes a mechanism by which sometimes you buy a property. So if your taxes are reduced because of 61A, what ends up happening is if you want to convert that use, the town has the right of first refusal to buy your
Right.
property where they can transfer that to somebody else. So we've bought, Mazarenko property was a 61A, and I think also the Al Collins property at the top of Half Mile Hill, I think.
so then,
In the distinction between the 61A is that's a tax classification,
right.
Yeah.
and one is an ownership
And
interest.
correct me if I'm wrong, you owe your back taxes if you sell to a commercial entity at that point, correct?
That's correct.
If you do a
Yeah.
change in use.
That's sometimes why
They don't have
it's attractive to go to the town, and on top of everything else, you get paid your money faster. Yeah, because you don't have to wait till you go through subdivision approval and all that sort of stuff, so,
Back taxes exceed the value of the
yeah.
land.
Yeah.
And then there's a conservation restriction. Does that affect, so when you talk about those rights, like, I know it talks about a path can be constructed and so forth, and you can walk on this part, but does that mean that every part that has a CR is sort of open for citizens to, walk through and
Right,
use?
no.
I mean, it varies. Like, if you look at the ones that we have, so on the Rolling Ridge property,
Right.
there are certain areas where you're allowed to walk and not walk. On the one that we did, the Leonard Farm, it's the same thing. There's areas where we have physical access to and areas where we don't.
And there's some that merely just protect against future development, correct? Not necessarily public use?
Well, let's see. I mean, if you look at it, these are the ones where we bought just a conservation restriction as opposed to buying the fee in the property. So
Right.
there is, Rolling Ridge is one, the Old Center is another one, the Leonard one is a third one, and the only other one that has that is Windrush, which was even more complicated because that was a combination of a conservation restriction and a fee purchase, and the fee purchase was two towns, both Boxford and North Andover, so it was a little bit more complex.
Great.
Yeah.
And that really, those sort of rights of the public to use it is really determined during the transaction. So when
Right,
you have the
yeah.
transaction of conveying the conservation restriction, if you say, well, the public is going to be able to use it also, that's another, sort of
Right.
conveying either a public easement or a license or a public.
And then from a tax perspective, is the property taxed at its remaining market value or not taxed? So I entered into let's say I'm one of these people who, sold a conservation restriction on my property. Maybe I allowed an easement or a path or something like that, but then does that get taxed at some sort of level, like
different
agricultural
rate?
land?
Yeah, well,
So a different rate for.
I know its value is going to be
the
lower.
value is lower, so it
Because
would be.
it's-
But the interesting thing is, the only one of the ones that we've done that's on private land is Leonard. All the other ones were on charities. So Rolling Ridge didn't pay taxes to begin with, Old Center Realty didn't pay taxes to begin with, and Windrush didn't pay taxes to begin with, so that was the only one.
So just Usler paid?
Not Usler,
No,
no,
not Uslar?
Leonard.
No, but
Usler, we own the land.
we own the
bought the
land.
land.
Okay.
Yeah.
Didn't we own Academy too?
No.
No, that was a conservation
Just
restriction.
conservation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jump into the next.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Speaking of
rest
Usla
of the day
property,
off.
yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Have a great night, Suzanne. Thank you. Usla property, while we're there. So this was actually put forth by the by Community Preservation in 2012. Under the application, we had said that we would construct, it's an excellent location for parking area directly off Osgood, thus making the entire open space corridor more readily available to town residents, which I wholeheartedly agree. If you go by Wire Hill, or you go by the Stevie's lot, I mean, they are jammed, they're on the street. So, and I guess we can build either on Lot 2 or 3.
But not both.
but not both. We do need written approval from the Uslers, but they cannot deny it, and it's just a gravel. Terry is far more familiar with the exact area, and I have spoken to Jen because there are some issues up there. The trails are being blocked. We don't know if it's them or neighbors, but, a lot of landscaping is being dumped on the trails, and, the fire hydrants seem to be being used, and that's stuff for another day,
Yeah,
and
it could very
conservation.
well be the three, there's those three houses there. that-
Yeah, oh, yeah. Oh, I'm
that's
not blaming the
probably-
Usos.
yeah,
Oh, no.
yeah.
It could be anybody. It could be
Yeah.
anybody's landscaper up
Yeah.
there. But, that would probably, we'd alleviate some of that if we put in that gravel parking lot, because it would connect easier. We're overflowing at the other two lots at right, So 2 or 3, lot 2 or 3 is, and like I said, Terry has a much better grasp on.
Can you show me which one's 2 and 3? I don't know.
Yeah.
There should be a plan further in the document, but
Oh.
2's to the right of the
Oh,
driveway.
I'm sorry.
Three-
Yeah.
3 is the main parcel. Looks like it extends all the
Okay,
way.
yeah. Okay. Okay.
And that's why I said I thought 2 went out to the trails, but 3 maybe is a better option up and around, but,
Right now, the cross-country team is coming down through Lot 3, right down to Osgood Street, kind of like I'm showing you here with the red pen. That's how they're running right now. So that's where the trail that exists goes. That's the only trail that I know of that's there. So,
down this way.
Terry, I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you know who put that trail there?
I did a lot of it.
When?
Fair enough.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, a lot of
I
it's
didn't know that
natural.
before I asked, by the way.
A lot of it's natural. If you go up it, there's a row of maple trees on both sides. It must have been an old entrance to the Stevens Estate or something.
Yeah.
So it's very natural.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's a legacy thing going
Yeah.
back
But
forever.
once
When
the-
it was just the farm, it was probably the horse farm.
Yeah, but once the trees
yeah.
end, then you had to kind of cut through and went along the stone wall, that type of thing, to stay as far away from the house as you can, you know. So
right.
that
Yeah, you
type
don't want to
of thing.
encroach.
But what would be really nice is if we could go off of, through Route,
Right up
Lot
there.
3 and connect to the horse trail
Right.
that's at the base of Half Mile Hill.
Right.
That
So
connects
come up
right
this
there.
way and do the lot
The
up
only,
here.
there is a brook there, and that's why I asked you if there would be somebody that could build a bridge, just like a Boy Scout group or whatever, can put a bridge
Mm-hmm.
over that. Or, unfortunately, if you stay close to the house, you avoid having to build a bridge. But again, my first
Yeah.
thought would be to stay away from the house, you know.
Yeah, probably. Have you talked to Glenn from the Trails Committee at all? Because he's
No, not
very,
yet.
because if you remember, I think it was like 2 years ago, CPA funded a small project for a path.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And, I mean, he was amazing. He went out and he had his phone and his GPS and everything, and he was here, and they calculated on the fly where they needed, fencing and so forth, so,
Yeah.
in a path. But he might be a good one to bring into the mix on this.
Right.
Yeah, my concern is that in the paperwork, we have the right to construct a parking lot.
So if I can answer that, this.
Please
real
do.
quick. So, in Lot 3, right there by the base of the, next to the wall, away from the driveway, down at the street, you could put in a couple of lot. My only problem with going in Lot 1 or Lot 2.
Can't do
is-
one.
Not one.
Okay.
2 or 3.
You can't do one?
Nope.
Okay, yeah.
Well,
That's
their-
theirs.
One is
their
really just the
lot.
driveway
Okay,
and then their
so
main house.
Yeah.
you're gonna end up having to go up past the little horse farm, and, boy, that doesn't go well. Sometimes she doesn't like
Right.
it at all.
Uh-oh.
And then you get up into the private driveway where you're gonna trap people up in there, and they're gonna be turning around in their driveway all the time.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, it's.
We don't want to harass the people either.
Let me ask maybe a dumb question. So Lot 3 backs up against the Stevens estate, right?
Correct.
Could we not attach parking to the existing parking at the Stevens Estate?
No, it doesn't,
It's too far.
it's
and
too
off
far.
the
There's,
road.
it's,
We want something
it
right on
connects
the
to
road.
We want something-
the lawn.
Well,
Yeah.
the thing with it is,
Right?
is you want signage to let people know
Yeah.
that, and where it connects. So it's nice when you go over to a lot of these properties and say, this trail takes you here, 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 and then somebody parks and they got a way to go.
Right.
Yeah, you definitely can walk right in, and that's what the kids do. They run through the Stevens Estate and then catch the trail on
On
the
the
parking
other
lot end of that. So that is, there is an entrance over there and a clear trail going that way, but the money trail would be to get you over to
To
Alpine
half
Hall.
mile. So my question is, I mean, we have the funds, we should do it. What's next steps, you know, I mean, can we, that's also, now we're constructing a road to a parking lot. That doesn't say we can construct a road.
Oh, I
we
wouldn't put a
can't.
road in. No.
What are you gonna do,
Yeah,
drive over the
right on the
grass?
street.
Oh, I thought you said the parking lot up here.
No, right here.
Oh,
right
yeah,
on the
okay,
street.
that's my,
Right-
yeah, okay, that's,
They would-
yes.
They wouldn't
okay.
even see it from their house. They would,
Can't do
that would be.
That's true, you're right.
You would, 'cause
So
their
right
house
here,
faces
yes,
this way.
yes, okay.
So they wouldn't even be looking at that parking lot ever, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing too, we do want to be, you know,
This is kind of a walkthrough piece of property. This is going to be very difficult for us to determine, looking at this. So you really got to
I
kind
was
of.
going to say, you
We
know,
have to do
maybe
a
what we
walk.
do is
That's the
go
next
out
step.
and do a visit, and, you know, invite a few other people and so
I agree.
forth. 'cause
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be the next
It's
step.
like the Conservation Commission, the planning board does site visits because you can't visualize it
Yeah.
there.
Because
So, yeah.
part of what, there's a gas easement that comes through the back of all this property. Goes right there, and it's already cut trail, because they had to dig the gas in.
Yeah.
So the trail is already there. You know, and it's kind of funny when you go by it, like, that road must have existed, like you say, because there's fire hydrants on it, in the middle of the woods. You know, you run into fire hydrants.
yeah, but I wonder if some of those fire hydrants there weren't for controlled burns and stuff too.
Yeah. Well, I asked the fire department, they have no idea they're there.
Oh, they have no idea they're there.
Probably not.
So I guess not, yeah.
Who knows, maybe the Stevens just put them in, you know, as part of their whole complex. Yeah.
They could have, right?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I took pictures and they dated them, and they're very, very old. One of them is really, really old.
Oh, that's
I
kind of
mean,
neat.
It looks the same as about the time the mill was put in.
And they still have pressure?
Yeah?
They're still working?
There's a key in one.
All right.
So, John, should we, who would we want to, should we set up a time to, you know, a list of people who we'd want to do this walkthrough with us, right? Because we'd
I
want some
think
other folks.
we'd invite, I mean, I don't know if Jennifer or other members of the Conservation
think that would be
Commission would have
great.
an interest, and we should definitely get Glenn and people on PhoNet to come. Those would be the two groups.
But I'm
that I
with you,
would
right in the
think.
corner.
Yeah.
Do we need to get anyone from the Oostlers?
We don't need permission to go.
We might.
Eventually, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Eventually they have to give
I-
permission.
I think it
We're
might not
inclined to do it on a stealth basis, walking through. I mean, I wouldn't ask their permission to take a walk on property.
No, understood.
Yeah.
But knowing that they're going to have to ultimately approve it, is it, I don't know them at all, is it better to get their buy-in early on?
You
I
know
don't
what
know.
I'm gonna do? I'm probably gonna reach out to John Smolak, who was their lawyer. The family is, they've got a son who doesn't live in North Andover anymore, who's relatively young, but the mother's older, and so I'm gonna have to, you know, I mean, I met them a few times when we did the thing, but I don't really know them that well.
Okay.
And maybe ask him what is the best way to do it, so, yeah.
I mean, they can't say no,
They
but we
can't-
certainly don't
but
want to
you're
be
right, you're right. You don't
disrespectful.
want to piss them off. you know,
Let's just start with them on the good side.
Exactly, yeah,
By
exactly.
the way, we're.
But
gonna do
I'm
what we
with
said we were
Terry, I
gonna do,
mean,
and
my
let's talk
my
about it.
initial is that right in the corner, small gravel,
Yeah.
you know, so that, and signage so that people know. And it's, and I think because I've noticed, so, you know, that overflow at the Hill and the overflow at the Stevie's Lot, I mean, it's unbelievable on the weekends. It thrills me, I'm
I
happy.
mean, one of the things that's also happened is because Edgewood was building that other part to their facility, which is done now, I think.
I think so
A
too.
fair number of people, if you knew what was going on, used to park up there.
Yeah.
And you couldn't do that for a while. Now I think you can do it.
I think it
again,
can probably
so,
go back,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, they have the spots are marked for,
Yeah.
but the nursing homes use them.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question on the lot itself. I mean, nothing in the document determines how big or how many spots.
Nope.
How do we go with that process? Is that something that we work with the planning board on, or do we have?
I think it's
fair
probably with
discretion?
the Conservation
Conservation,
Commission, because the
okay.
Conservation Commission is the steward of the property.
Got it, okay.
And I think they
Yeah.
have an obligation to keep it aesthetically right. You know,
Absolutely, yeah.
so that could mean, 2 spots or whatever, I mean, maybe 3. I wouldn't go any bigger than that. This isn't that type of parking, it's, in my eyes. But of course, they don't want them parking on their front lawn, so they're gonna want enough there that's gonna be,
Yeah, if we're going to do this, and we're working toward overflow, I mean, 3 parking spaces, to me, doesn't seem like a lot in terms of making
I don't know
an
if I
impact.
agree with 3. I think we need to look.
But,
I'd be a little.
I just wasn't sure- I wasn't- I wasn't sure
We go out and look, I think, walk
That's where the
around
site
and
visit-
feel,
Yeah, do we do a study?
hey,
Do
6
we-
or 8 doesn't
Yeah.
really feel like very much
Yeah.
either, so let's.
Do we do
That
a
there.
needs study or something like that? I don't know that I'm looking to spend more
Yeah.
money on it. but, you know.
I'm just saying, because there is a house here,
Yep.
and, I mean, even though we're away from the use of property, we are near that house, so you want to kind of be nice.
But they also, I mean, we do want to be nice, we want to be good stewards, we want to be good neighbors, but they also benefit from this every single day, as
They
do their home
And
values
it's
every
an
single
interesting
day.
thing Because
You're right about
we
that.
ran into the same situation at Windrush.
Yeah.
Is it took them a while to understand.
Yeah,
that,
like,
you don't own the property anymore. It's this
we're gonna come and go. We're gonna run into that at Roland
Who
Ridge.
can use the property? And they figured it out,
Yeah.
but it took a while,
Longer than it should.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so
so
Yeah,
awesome.
this is-
So-
I mean, does anybody have a preference of when we go? I mean, do you want to set something up now? Or?
Spring?
Yes, great.
I think you gotta wait for when Jennifer's available, because I think that she's a key person in this whole thing.
So what I would suggest
Yeah.
maybe is if we ask staff to coordinate time with Conservation and Jen and Glenn,
And phone
and
it.
come back to us with some options.
Yeah,
Does
I
that
mean,
make sense?
the question is, do you want to do it during the winter or you want to wait till the spring?
I would rather do it.
It's as
sooner.
dry as could be up there, other than that
Yeah,
brook.
okay.
Because honestly.
Spring might be messy.
Good point. yeah.
Because if we want to, theoretically, if we wanted to build a parking lot, let's just say
Right.
we decided we want to build one, et cetera, we want to put in an application, otherwise we sit on our hands for another 12 months.
Well, we don't have to.
We don't have to, it's all right, we already have the money for it. The money's
We
been
already have
sitting
the
there
money?
since
Okay.
2012 or whatever, 14,
Yeah,
whatever.
so
We have the money.
Oh, the money's already allocated?
The money's been
Oh, I
allocated
didn't know
within
that.
this.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Oh, we have the money to do it.
So,
That'd be an easy one to do.
Real easy.
I would prefer to do it in the winter months because the flora and fauna have not yet come in, so we can really see, get a
That's a good call, Donovan,
visualization
yeah.
of the whole
yeah,
property.
okay,
as we can see.
okay.
Big word.
I mean,
Nickely.
can you talk to Jennifer? I'll talk to
You
you.
making fun of me?
Yeah, a little bit. Nickel words over there.
Didn't she say anything? She's available.
She is available next week.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Or at least we just-
Why don't I
Yeah,
send,
no, I'll give Jen a call tomorrow and
Yeah.
everything,
oh,
yep,
perfect.
yep.
That works.
Okay,
Great,
excellent.
Thanks,
awesome.
Steph.
Now, on to Rolling Bridge. Here we have a problem. Here we definitely have a problem, and we need to speak with the pastor for
Yeah,
sure.
I don't think legally we have a problem. I think
No,
practically we have a
No, I think relationship-wise,
relationship-wise.
we have a problem.
Yeah.
But we also have, and conservation has a problem, which we brought to Jen. Jen went out this week. She was out this week or last week. They did build a
That's where
parking
you
lot
park
for
and that's where you-
themselves.
Right.
That's how
Rolling
it is.
Rolling
They
Ridge.
dropped a tree across and.
They are now
put a no-
blocking
no-
trails. They're cutting trees. That's conservation
Which
issues,
is a
though.
conservation issue, yeah. I mean, to give you a little bit of context on what went on there, the prior pastor or rector,
Yes.
Larry Peacock, we probably met 10 times with him over 3
Good
years,
man.
4 years before we
He was a
even
great
broached
guy.
the subject. He was a great guy. I think the new guy, he's a new guy. I mean, there are a couple of ways to do it. It's probably we're going to first give him a chance to get it right, maybe offer to visit with them and
Yeah,
just
I'm with
talk
you.
to him.
Yeah,
I
I'm
mean,
totally with you.
And look, go to the place and say, can we sit down and talk and maybe take a walk or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. I mean, I would be glad to do it because I have the continuity, but if somebody else wants to go.
No, that's
well,
fine, John, if you want
Yeah.
to do it, that's fine. I mean, the thing is with that, unfortunately, I mean, we have the grant of trail and parking easement out there. Could get contentious, you know.
It
It
may,
may
yeah.
not, it may. The issue being, he's throwing people off there. I mean, he
I
comes
know
out
he is.
yelling at
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Terry's not alone. It's
Yeah.
very contentious out there.
So, but if you arrange a meeting, you just let us know, and if anybody wants to attend.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm gonna do is say, hey, can I come over sometime, or do you want to go for coffee or
I
something?
mean, has he
like that?
read, does he understand?
I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, like, Tom Coppa, who used to be on this committee, his
Yeah.
wife was actually helped them with some of their financial stuff, and I think Tom's moved, hasn't he? I haven't seen him in
I haven't
years.
seen him in a long time.
Yeah.
So, can I make a suggestion? And Terry, I think this sort of goes a little bit against of what you just suggested, which I initially thought was a good idea, and now I've sort of backtracked a little. Perhaps we don't, you set a meeting for you and maybe one other of us, and we all don't go if we can make it, because the next step would be to bring them here.
Here, yeah, and we don't want to en masse
And by the way, we don't want 9 of us showing up, and then all of a sudden we have an open meetings issue. You know what I mean? So I think maybe have you and somebody else or something, and then we bring them in if that didn't go well. Because Terry, I would likely show up, and I'm sure show of us too, and I just don't want to cause an issue, especially if it does get contentious. I'd rather save all of us for interview.
Right.
No, but I will tell you this, though, the only thing, like, if I'm gonna go do anything CPA-wise, I don't wanna do it by myself. I always want somebody with me.
I'm
you know,
with you.
so
That's why I'm saying at least one other.
Just
Yeah,
because
that's
it's
what I
just,
usually did. We never did it. There was always only
Two. That's the smartest way to do it.
Yeah.
I believe
Yeah.
Jen should be there as well, because she knows the intricacies.
Absolutely. I actually think
Yeah.
I would suggest that the request for the meeting come from Jen. Because it's a conservation issue. Doesn't it? The grant of trail and all of that, isn't that conservation?
Yeah, it's all of
It
them,
is.
because they're, again, they're the stewards of
I
all the
mean,
open
so they're the
space.
stewards of it. I mean, we paid for it, but,
On
so
their
we're,
behalf.
we're, I don't know, I feel like we're almost secondary to conservation. I don't know, I may be totally wrong in that.
this whole thing's gonna be conservation.
Like John and Jen
Okay,
and.
the thing is, in the CR, it definitely specifies that there has to be a parking lot.
Absolutely.
The money has been provided and everything. They have to build it.
Absolutely,
End of story. That's
period.
it.
But I
They
think we
have to
just,
build it,
I
or
think we
we-
need to let them know
I
it's
think,
gonna
when I-
happen.
So when I went there,
Contract,
they said, the parking lot is built. That's what you have to use.
But it's not to our
It's not.
specs.
All it is the old driveway, and they cleared the brush away from it, and they're saying that's the parking lot.
So
And
wait-
but it's not even in the right
wait-
area.
But
It's
wait a
not
second, wait a
anywhere.
second. As I'm reading this, the parking area, the grantee has the right to construct.
Yes,
The town's the grantee.
correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not up to Rolling Ridge to
No, no,
build
no,
it.
no.
It's up to the
No, but the
Conservation
money
Commission.
is there. I'm saying the money is
Oh,
already
the money's there. Okay, I just want to be sure
Yeah.
that.
Oh, no,
we're
we
not-
already have the money.
Okay.
All of these have been
We
funded.
build it, not the
Yeah.
Rolling
Right,
Ridge.
that's why
Got it.
these are kind of
Make sure
high
it's-
on the
Got it.
radar, because these have already been funded,
Yeah.
I mean, in theory, we could submit plans and,
and just show up and do it.
Yeah, sure.
But we want to be good neighbors.
it'd be nice.
We'll escalate when
Tracy, I think you
necessary.
put the fear of the Lord in it.
It'd be nice.
That's what I said, we'll escalate if necessary. I mean, I think the issue is in particular with Rolling Ridge, it's such a gorgeous area. It should be open to the public. That was the whole intent. No one, they're not going to be, there's not going to be hordes of people there. It's, bird watchers and a couple of people walking around to look at the beautiful lake. And you can have a beautiful view now because they've cut down all the trees. So, that's a whole other issue.
Oh,
But
boy.
Yeah, the thing is, they cleared all that nice rhododendron, how.
All the natural rhododendron.
Yeah.
The natural, plantings for the entrance to that. That was the original entrance, and there was all rhododendrons and everything planted all the way down to that entrance. It's cool.
it's all gone.
It's funny because Larry wanted to restore the
I know.
original.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it was
Really?
Fletcher Steel.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, the landscape architect who did that is extremely famous.
Really?
Like Homestead-like famous.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Wow.
And just-
it's a shame.
Did the
like,
Boston
yeah,
Gardens,
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know.
that's a
Have you
shame.
ever seen the fountains there?
Nope.
They're absolutely magnificent.
Oh, my God.
The problem is they're
I've never
virtually
been.
Oh, you
impossible
need to go.
maintain.
It's
Really?
so beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So-
So it's
Where would I
something
park?
that,
Where would I park?
That's true.
On the, what green is that?
Yeah, I think it's the 8th grade.
I think so. So then, great. So then, I mean, I would suggest that it's a Jen and John initial.
Sounds right, yeah.
Yep, good, great. So, I mean, I think, that's really it on the parking lot.
Tracy, thank you for doing that.
Oh,
That's great.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's great. Yeah, good.
Are there more parking lots? Or is it
No.
Tron?
No. I mean,
Bill, do you have anything new on the website?
No, you know what, I made 2 meetings with Chris and I had to move both of them, so I'll get back in there. I'll get in there soon.
The parking lot there, facing White Hill.
oh, the parking lot, Base White Hill. Oh, it's wonderful.
They did
It's
a nice
wonderful.
job on that parking lot.
It looks
the
good,
base of
yeah.
White Hill.
Looks great.
Yeah.
A lot of
Still
people
in
are
the
in there. It's
Yeah, I mean, that's the advantage.
So
The
now-
trustees do everything they do well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they do a really nice job.
And when
so-
they say they're gonna do it.
Yeah, so, good. Before we break, any projects people are hearing about?
No.
They're relatively.
Except for, I'm sorry, before, no, but there is something, right? There is something, other potential projects. There is a potential project, but they're not asking us for money, they're just asking us for support.
Oh, yeah, that thing I sent you from, wish I copied it. forgot.
I wish I did too. I almost
the,
forgot about the whole thing.
Some memorial or?
Yeah,
Yeah, so they got a.
Vietnam Memorial up
They
at,
got a grant to redo the Vietnam Memorial at the high school. The guy who heads up, what do they call it? Yeah,
I know.
Patriotic observances?
Yeah, patriotic, yes, thank
So
you.
he's just asking us for a letter saying we support his efforts in doing that. He's not asking for any money. He's not asking for anything. He's just asking, he's saying that it's going to go better with the federal grant
So his
he's going
grant
after.
application has what cities, what town committees and commissions, who's supporting this? So I think he's looking for a general letter from community preservation to support, to put in his grant application.
So basically what happened to that, they built that when the high school was built, then someone stole the emblems. There was emblems
I
that
still don't know
were
why it's not.
put in there that were,
library.
supposed to, you go to your computer, it would, give you all the information on it, whatever. Someone popped them out and stole them. And then a snowplow hit the benches and
trashed
took out part of
those.
the shrubs, and the brickwork is all. So anyway, he's been looking for money to restore that. He originally came to us for that, but we weren't able to do it. I forget, the town manager told us why, but, so now he's found another source. So he's just looking for support. So that's why I brought it to the board, and if we could write a letter from the board.
So, would you like to make a motion, Rick?
I'd like to make a motion to support with a letter, his application. I guess Laurie could draft up that letter and.
Yeah, that
just
would
send
be,
it.
if we could have her do that, that'd be awesome.
She'll be back, I think, on Monday, Sunday.
Yeah.
So that's a motion.
Motion made.
Oh, you have a question?
I do have a question on it. I mean, does any, maybe it's just a point, does anything that comes out of this committee of support have to be strictly tied to our mandate?
It doesn't, I
When
don't
it's not
think,
tied to dollars.
but I think it actually is, I mean, indirectly.
All right, that's-
Yeah, yeah. I think that would
So
be-
that, I just ask another question. Have we ever done anything like this before? Sent a letter?
Not in my time.
No.
And should
Just
the-
curious.
Should the
Yeah.
letter specifically cite something from community preservation?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
It should.
In terms of open space or something?
No.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, I think we were issuing a letter
Not
saying
open
that we
space.
think it.
No, not open space, but
serves
something
the
within our
historical
purview.
integrity
Oh, yeah,
of
that's
our-
what I'm-
Yes.
The historical mission. and-
Lori will do that.
Yeah, Laurie will be
She
fine.
could, she's.
I mean,
I don't want this to anyway sound like I'm not supporting
That's exactly what it sounds like.
I'm not a
Let the
big,
record reflect.
I've only recently learned myself, like grants and all, because now I'm in public housing. And even with, I did a community preservation application today for West Newbury, actually. And one of the things that they're now asking there is who supports this?
Right.
What town committees or commissions are supporting this? And all of the grants that I've put in are asked that now. Who else is supporting this? So when Terry
Gives them
mentioned it, I was like, oh, I just started to have to do that because I never had to do it before.
Yeah. Yeah, and that logically makes sense because you want to
Sure.
have a broad,
Well, you know,
yeah.
Rogue, you
Yeah.
know, memorial builders, like, there's
Yeah.
not many Rogue, but.
Okay, so motion made and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Great. Anything else, the minutes, the last meeting, does somebody want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I would move to approve the minutes from the last meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Seconded?
All in favor?
Aye.
Abstain.
And then I guess, yeah, you weren't here, yeah. Motion to adjourn,
Motion to adjourn?
So
Seconded?
moved.
all in favor?
Aye.